Memory of Grace. The memory of first grace which once guided bygone Tarnished to the lands between. Tarnished Golden Sunflower. A large flower that blooms facing the Erdtree. Though wilted and faded, it still retains holy essence. Ordovis's Greatsword. This sword is imbued with an ancient holy essence. Its red tint exemplifies the nature of primordial gold, said to be close in nature to life itself. Siluria's Tree. The primordial form of the Erdtree is close in nature to life itself, and this spear, modeled on its crucible, is imbued with ancient holy essence. Tree Sentinel Armor. Golden armor of the heavy cavalry tree sentinels who serve the Erdtree. Imposingly sturdy and nigh unbreakable, the grace of old yet lingers. Though not often discussed, there's a very real possibility that the grace found in the lands between today isn't what it used to be. Welcome to another episode of Fear the Old Lore, where we compare the English and Japanese text of games for more insight into their lore. In this episode, we'll examine the history of the Guidance of Grace, its relationship to the Tarnished, as well as its current state in the lands between. Let's begin. Not much is said directly about grace, but according to Malenia, it comes from the Erdtree, and its guidance used to shine in the eyes of the Tarnished and was supposed to guide them through their burdens. Burden here comes from shime in Japanese, which can be understood as someone's duty, mission, responsibility, or even the purpose driving them forward. I don't mind burden as a localization, and it isn't a big deal on its own, but Grace's ability to guide the Tarnished through their duty rather than their burden will become more relevant as we examine a few other item descriptions. For instance, Lord's runes say there were the runes of one who is destined to become a lord, but when the Elden Ring was shattered, all that remained was the distant duty. It probably won't come as a surprise, but duty here comes from the same shime which is used for how grace is said to guide the Tarnished through their burden. But what may be the most notable about Lord's runes is that they imply one's duty is intertwined with their fate, and both are governed by the Elden Ring. If this is the case, then does that mean when grace guides the Tarnished towards their duty, it's also guiding them to their fate? Maybe, but it bears a little more exploring. Marika and Radagon's Sword Seals and Scar Seals state those chosen by the gods were branded and given a lifelong duty, and that solemn duty weighs upon the one beholden, not unlike a gnawing curse from which there is no deliverance. This suggests that duty could be equated to a curse, which is further supported in the remembrance of the fire giant and Burn O Flame, which say, upon realizing the flames of their forge would never die, Queen Marika marked the giant with a curse. O trifling giant, mayest thou tend thy flame for eternity. And, the fire giants borrowed from the power of a fell god, and still they were defeated. Yet their failure released them from their solitary curse, to serve as keepers of the flame for eternity. If Marika can inflict a curse onto others and bestow upon them a lifelong duty, this may explain the way Hugh continues smithing weapons even when his body and memories burn with the Erdtree. Those cursed by the gods are expected to place their duty over life and limb. Quote, the Two Fingers has high hopes for the Tarnished, that even should they be wounded, even should they fall, they will continue to fight for their duty.
Very well. In Marika's own words, my lord, and thy warriors, I divest each of thee of thy grace. With thine eyes dimmed, ye will be driven from the lands between. Ye will wage war in a land afar, where ye will live and die. Then, after thy death, I will give back what I once claimed, return to the lands between, wage war, and brandish the Elden Ring, grow strong in the face of death. Warriors of my lord, Lord Godfrey.
Please, become Elden Lord. Hugh was always saying that you were a lord to him. So slay her with the weapons he smithed. Slay the god Marika, who cursed us all.
In some ways, the Tarnished are similar to the Headless Mausoleum Knights who are cursed to continue to perform their duties even in death, though the Tarnished may have had less choice in the matter. So while the two aren't the same, another potential parallel I've noticed between them is that Mausoleum Soldiers and Knights use the Crest of the Eclipse, which depicts a sun that's been drained of color and is meant to keep Destined Death at bay. This draining of the sun's color may be thematically connected to the way the Tarnished have been drained or divested of grace. Would draining the Tarnished of their grace also keep Destined Death at bay? Or are they cursed by their duty to become Elden Lord, to rise again should they fall? One of the stranger aspects of duty in Elden Ring is that it seems to be tied to light to some degree. The Japanese version of the Darkness Incantation makes this a little more explicit. Rather than saying the assassins pursued their duty in the darkness that is without grace, which implies the assassins already had duties to fulfill, the Japanese word for pursue, motomeru, doesn't mean to literally follow or pursue something, it means to seek or search for something. In other words, the assassins sought duty within the darkness that is without grace because they had none. To delve into the idea further, Irina, as Hayata says when she's given Shibiri grapes, she sees a distant light in the back of her eyes that will guide her to her duty to become a maiden of the Three Fingers. Additionally, in the crimson hood worn by Radharika, it mentioned such cloaks were given to those without shime, missions or duties, and that Radharika had never once seen the guidance of grace, whereas those who wore navy hoods were both given missions and had seen the guidance of grace. And now, the final piece to tie these concepts together comes from the words of the Two Fingers themselves, as relayed to us by Ania.
Great Elden Ring, root of the Golden Order, anchor of all lands, giver of grace, wellspring of all joy. Until it was shattered, the tragic corruption of the Order has taken its toll. Across the realm, life lies in ruin, fallen to pieces. Foul curses and misery spread, unabating. But the greater will has not abandoned the realm, nor the life that inhabits it. So it is that the Tarnished are guided by grace, called to act. Brave Tarnished, your great rune is a handsome shard of the Elden Ring. Seek another of its kind to become Elden Lord and restore the Golden Order.
It's very subtle, but when the Two Fingers say the Tarnished are called to act, their Japanese dialogue says the guidance of grace grants duty or shime to the Tarnished. With Marika and Radagon's source seals likening duty to a gnawing curse, perhaps Radharika's right for saying the Tarnished are cursed after all. One of the questions I have is that if grace can confer duty, and duty is explicitly tied to fate in the Lord's Rune description, then does that mean grace is connected to fate as well? When Marika divested the Tarnished of their grace, was she divesting them of their fate? And if so, is that why the Tarnished cannot fully die? For what it's worth, Sellen is effectively immortal while her fate is held in suspense by General Radahn halting the movement of the stars in the night sky, and the only way to kill her comes from setting her fate back into motion. So when I mentioned earlier the Tarnished may have been effectively cursed by Marika, and that's why they continue to rise again when they fall, that may have only been one part of the equation. There's also the possibility their immortality could be a byproduct of being divested of their grace, their destiny, and their fate. In an interview in the overture of Elden Ring, game director Hidetaka Miyazaki was asked about the immortality of the Tarnished and if it was different from the Hollows of previous titles. Miyazaki responded by saying the immortality of the Tarnished comes from the guidance of grace awakening the Tarnished and calling them to the lands between, and the reason the player character is immortal is because guidance won't release them, whatever that means. Miyazaki was then asked if the demigods also gained immortality from grace, to which he replied, "The demigods are another story. The demigods' immortality is from Destined Death being removed from the Elden Ring." But this raises a lot of questions. If the demigods' immortality is contingent on Destined Death being removed from the ring, and the Tarnished are another story, does that mean the Tarnished existed in a time where the Rune of Death was still in the ring? I know one of the most common theories is that the Rune of Death was sealed with the creation of the Erdtree at the beginning of Marika and Godfrey's reign, but I think there's a large amount of evidence available which challenges this notion. For instance, if Destined Death was removed at the beginning of Marika and Godfrey's reign, then wouldn't the Tarnished have already been immortal? Why would it be grace that keeps them alive then? These are fairly rhetorical questions, and I'm sure as a community we could come up with some pretty convincing answers to each one. But before we get lost in the weeds hyper-focusing on every little detail, I think it would be better to pull back for a moment and list the potential reasons why the Rune of Death wasn't removed from the Elden Ring when Marika and Godfrey first came to power. Before getting into it, I'd like to say this list is inconclusive and there's a good possibility I may have forgotten things. I'll also apologize in advance since this is going to be a lot of information dumped at once. It's a bit too difficult trying to organically build on each point in an essay format without constantly doubling back to points I've already touched on, so hopefully it'll be more concise to list them out, and hopefully this list can serve as a useful reference material moving forward. So without further ado, here's a list of reasons to doubt Destined Death was removed from the Elden Ring when Marika and Godfrey came to power after the war against the Giants. 1. The Golden Order began upon removing Destined Death from the Elden Ring, but we don't actually know when that was. Many believe it was when Godfrey became Elden Lord since he's the patriarch of the Golden lineage, but outside of part of Roger's dialogue and the Telescope's description, and even including these to some degree, everything relating to the Golden Order can be tied to Radagon in some way. Therefore, it's more likely for the Golden Order to be Radagon's order than Godfrey's. 1a. The Cut 1.0 Lowlander's rune description has a typo or a mistranslation in it, and says, "Grace was brought to the very fringes and lowlands of the lands between, and with the Golden Order came the weight of its history, a history of conquest and subjugation." This makes it sound like grace was brought to the lands between with the Golden Order, but the Japanese says it was brought with the Erdtree, making it more ambiguous when the Golden Order first existed. 1b. There may not be a difference between the Golden Order and Golden Order fundamentalism. The Golden Order seal raises the power of fundamentalist incantations, not Erdtree incantations. In the Japanese description of the Golden Order Greatsword, it symbolizes Radagon's brandishing the tenets of Golden Order fundamentalism. 1c. Radagon's Elden Rune as depicted in his Soren Scar Seal appears in the Elden Ring. Litany of Proper Death creates an image of order and has Radagon's rune within it. The Sacred Relic Blades Waves of Gold also bears Radagon's Elden Rune within it, even when used by the Elden Beast, implying it's part of the order. 1d. Radagon is essentially called Golden Order, Radagon in his Japanese boss title plate, which can imply that he represents the Golden Order himself. This is similar to how Loretta is also known as the Knight of the Halig Tree, or how Morgott is also known as the Fell Omen. Why does Radagon represent the Golden Order more than Godfrey or Horaloo? 2. Golden Order incantations scale with intelligence, marking a departure from the early days of blind belief in the Erdtree, and how Erdtree incantations scale on faith alone. 2a. This coincides with how Marika declared her support for the Golden Order by saying their grace will be increased through understanding. Understanding, aka scholarship, the thing Radagon learned from Inala before becoming Elden Lord. 3. According to Heroes runes, in the past, heroes abundantly blessed by the Erdtree itself simply died. 3a. If grace didn't revive these heroes, were they destined to die, or is this another form of death? Either way, there is still some form of death in the lands between during the age of the Erdtree. 4. Churches of America have graveyards next to them. This wouldn't be that big of a deal, especially if the Churches of America were repurposed from pre-existing buildings, but it's also notable that the Volcano Manor and Raya Lucaria also have graveyards in them. Volcano Manor could predate Marika and Godfrey, but we know Raya Lucaria existed at the same time Godfrey ruled. So do its cemeteries also predate the age of Marika and Godfrey, or did Destined Death still exist in the lands between throughout their reign? 5. Why build so many catacombs at the roots of the Erdtree, and why is there Erdtree Burial at all if people shouldn't have been dying to begin with? If the catacombs predate the Erdtree, why are there headless statues on top of them when being headless is meant to keep Destined Death at bay, and why do these statues point toward the Erdtree? Do people who receive Erdtree Burial experience a different form of death than Destined Death? 6. Blessing of the Erdtree and Erdtree Heal say the Erdtree was like all life and that its period of abundance was fleeting. According to the remembrance of the regal ancestor, life sprouts from death as it does from birth, such is the way of the living. Poison Armament and Poison Mist elaborate, saying, "The death that begets life, that comes to all equally. That is to say, it is the cycle of rebirth put into practice." If the Erdtree truly was like all life, flourishing momentarily in a cycle of life and death, wouldn't this make the most sense if it existed in a time when Destined Death was still part of the world? 7. The Erdtree didn't start off perfect and eternal, and was later made to become perfect and eternal. 7a. Erdtree Heal, Blessing of the Erdtree. Quote, "The Erdtree once flourished with abundance, yet it was only for a fleeting moment. Such is the course of all life." 7b. Crimson, Cerulean Seed Talisman. Quote, "The Erdtree was once perfect and eternal, and thus was it believed that Erdtree seeds could not exist." If the Erdtree was once perfect and eternal, it would have needed to be before the Shattering, yet if it flourished with abundance only for a fleeting moment, this leaves the time for it to be made perfect fairly limited between the end of Godfrey's reign and before the Shattering. 8. Golden Order fundamentalism has the power to make things become immutable through the power of the law of regression. This power may have been used to put life in the Erdtree in a kind of stasis a la gold-tinged excrement. Quote, "For better or worse, it remains as it is." 9. The Erdtree may have previously been tinged with red, and that redness could have come from Destined Death. 9a. I'll go into more detail about this later, but this is potentially obscure due to issues with the writing and translations of the Gilded Greatshield and Ordorvis's Greatsword. Primordial gold might not be a thing. The red-tinged hue of primordial gold is said to be closer in nature to life and has an ancient holiness. From the regal ancestral spirit's remembrance, we're shown that death was part of life, and Destined Death deals pure holy damage. Was the original red-tinged hue of gold due to Destined Death? 9b. Red-tinged gold could be the first grace spoken of in the memory of grace, and if so, could be explicitly associated with the Tarnished. Even if the red-tinged grace of old may have been drained from Godfrey and his Tarnished warriors, it might be similar to how tarnished golden sunflowers have been drained of color yet retain their holy essence. This kind of holy essence that remains within them could be akin to the ancient holiness found in the Crucible Knight's red-tinted equipment and the Gilded Greatshield. If death was drained from life, then grace may have been similarly affected. The moon's ability to drain the sun of color and keep Destined Death at bay may be thematically relevant to the Tarnished being drained of grace. 10. If fate is tied to grace as evidenced by the Lord's rune, and grace comes from the Erdtree, but grace was changed from the grace of old into something new, does that mean fate was altered as well? Was Destined Death affected? 11. The Elden Ring didn't exert as much control over fate under Godfrey. 11a. Fate was once cradled in the stars of the night sky. Runala followed the stars until she was guided to her moon, which she would then use to bewitch the Academy. Karian astrology could only flourish if the Elden Ring didn't actively control the fate in the night sky. 11b. According to Muriel, once Radagon wed Runala, the Order of the Erdtree became conjoined with the fate of the moon, which further emphasizes the Elden Ring didn't fully control fate in Godfrey's time. 12. The state of the Flora and the lands between may be meant to reflect the history of the state of the Erdtree. 12a. Erdleaf flowers were fed by leaves from the Erdtree in antiquity, possibly implying that the current form of the Erdtree's leaves are insufficient for fostering growth. 12b. Golden sunflowers in Altus Plateau are a bright yellow, potentially reflecting the current nature of gold in lands between, whereas tarnished golden sunflowers have been drained of color. If the original grace of gold was more red-tinted or orange, were tarnished golden sunflowers originally more red-tinted as well? Were plants more tinged with red in the past? 13. If Marika's children represent aspects or flaws in the Order, then Miquella Malenia may represent the endless vitality and boundless growth of life without death. 13a. Why is Scarlet Rot a problem Golden Order fundamentalism cannot solve? Is it because its boundless growth is a byproduct of said order? Why does it only become problematic after the birth of millennia? 14. Quote, in accordance with an ancient pact with the Erdtree, it is said that minor Erdtree guardians' deaths led not to destruction, but instead to renewed eternal life as guardians. End quote. I know it's contentious when on the timeline the minor Erdtrees first appeared, but why were the minor Erdtree guardians supposed to die to begin with? Would the minor Erdtree guardians' pact with the Erdtree be really considered an ancient pact if it was made post-shattering? 15. When was the Erdtree burned? When were the minor Erdtrees killed? 15a. If the Flame of Ruin was sealed after the war against the Giants, when were the consecrated snowfield and mountaintops of the Giants' minor Erdtrees destroyed? If Destined Death was sealed on the Erdtree's creation, it doesn't leave many options, though it may tie into the Flame of Messmer introduced in the trailer of the DLC. Even if the Flames of Ruin and Destined Death are sealed, it may still be possible to burn the Erdtree based on the minor Erdtree next to Volcano Manor, or how one can burn the Erdtree with either the Frenzied Flame or one who envisions flame. 16. Maliketh's Black Blade shows the sigil of the ancient Erdtree on its icon art, but to be fair, no sigil appears when the spell is cast. Nonetheless, this may hint that Destined Death's power is connected to the ancient Erdtree. 17. When were Fire Monks converted to become Blackflame Monks? If they were converted before the Glowmide Queen was defeated, it would have had to have happened after the war against the Giants, since the Fire Monks were created to guard the Giants' flame. And if the Glowmide Queen was active after the war against the Giants, it would place the removal of Destined Death from the Elden Ring further back in the timeline than many suspect. Obviously, many of the points I've listed here can be argued against individually, and many are probably deserving of their own videos, to be honest. But ain't nobody got time for that. Instead, I'll touch on a few here, and if you want to discuss or argue more, feel free to use the comments or join my Discord server linked in the video description. Alright, so now that I've hopefully set up enough room to cast out on when exactly Destined Death was removed from the Elden Ring, I can transition into the main point of the video. I think there's a really good possibility that in the days of Godfrey, the Erdtree and the Grace of Gold were tinged with a reddish hue, and once Destined Death was removed, this red tint went away. I think the most likely time this would have happened would be when the Tarnished were divested of their grace, and or when Radagon took the throne of Elden Lord, though it's not clear if these two events overlap or how much time passed between them. Now, I realize without context, it might seem a bit out of order to claim the Erdtree used to be tinted red. As I briefly mentioned in point 9 of my list a few moments ago, a few issues of translation and a potential typo make it more difficult to reach this conclusion based on the English text of the game. The Gilded Greatshield says, "The red tinge in the gold coat mirrors the primordial matter that became the Erdtree. the color of homeward yearning. However, a more literal rendering of the Japanese text is closer to, the Gilded Greatshield's coating, imitating the Erdtree's origins, possesses a red hue. It is the color of reminiscence. Admittedly, these are very similar, but the crucial takeaway here is that there's no primordial form of the Erdtree, and it wasn't spawned from some primordial matter either. This will become more relevant as we move on. Take the following with a grain of salt. As I was combing through descriptions relating to gold in the Crucible, something stood out to me while examining Ordovis's greatsword. Unlike the rest of the Crucible Knight's set, Ordovis's greatsword says, Gensho no Ogon, or original gold, is closer in nature to life and possesses a red hue. However, this is only one character short from Gensho no Ogonju, which means the original golden tree, or the original Erdtree. Oddly enough, there are no other mentions of primordial gold within the game, and with the Crucible aspect incantations, Crucible Knight set, Godskin Noble set, Silurius Tree, and Gilded Greatshield all referencing a golden tree instead of just gold, there's a good chance Ordovis's greatsword may have been meant to refer to the golden tree as well. So, if Ordovis's greatsword does have a typo, what's it supposed to say? Quote, the original Erdtree was closer to life, and therefore it's said to have possessed redness. This sword possesses that ancient holy quality. End quote. Even if we assume this isn't a typo though, and it's supposed to say that original gold was tinted red, it would still be indirectly related to the Erdtree via the Gilded Greatshield. The ancient holiness within the red tinge of the Crucible Knight's gold is closer to life itself, and is likely analogous to the kind of primordial life energy spoken of in the Crimson, Cerulean, and Viridian Amber medallions treasured as the most precious of jewels in the age of Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. So if both the Erdtree and gold are red tinged in Godfrey's age, it would align with how the Tree Sentinel armor references a grace of old, and how the memory of grace says it's the memory of first grace, which implies the existence of second grace, though neither the Tree Sentinel armor or memory of grace are particularly red. Even so, the idea of red-tinted gold existing in the time of Godfrey can be corroborated somewhat in how Tier 13 Golden Runes say, the grace of the Erdtree blessed those who were first to serve it with the most vivid coloration, and how red suddenly appears in Newman, Heroes, and Lord's runes, though this could be a natural byproduct of having so many runes concentrated together. But this raises a question. If red is associated with a primordial form of life found within the Erdtree, how does it differ now? This is going to be controversial, or it would be if I hadn't already spoiled it in my list earlier, but I think the answer is that life is fleeting in the Age of Abundance under Godfrey's rule, and was later made to be immutable through Golden Order fundamentalism. Quote, there were once heroes who walked the battlefields, abundantly blessed by the Erdtree itself, who upon earning their honor simply died. Quote, the Erdtree once flourished with abundance, and it was only for a fleeting moment. Such is the course of all life. Quote, ancestral spirits exist as a phenomenon beyond the purview of the Erdtree. Life spreads from death as it does from birth. Such is the way of the living. These descriptions are pretty clear that the Erdtree was fleeting, just like all life, yet they're contradicted by the Crimson and Cerulean Seed talismans, which say, the Erdtree was once perfect and eternal, and thus was it believed that Erdtree seeds could not exist. How could the Erdtree be fleeting, yet perfect and eternal? It's a matter of timing. The Erdtree could have been ephemeral in its early days, but if it was made to be perfect and eternal later on, there would be no contradiction. However, a few questions remain. How was it made perfect and eternal, and when was it made perfect and eternal? As I mentioned earlier, I think the most likely time the Erdtree would have been altered is either when Marika divested Godfrey of his grace and exiled him from the lands between, or when Radagon became Elden Lord and instituted the tenets of Golden Order fundamentalism into the Elden Ring, and the two events could coincide. Now, I know many people believe the Golden Order began at the start of Godfrey and Marika's rule, but I disagree with this for a number of reasons I've already listed. But to give more context to why I think the Golden Order started in the time of Radagon, I believe that when the blessings of the Erdtree started to wane in the Age of Abundance, Marika realized her epoch of glistening life was coming to an end. And just like Gwyn choosing to artificially prolong his age by linking the first flame, Marika chose to artificially prolong her age by getting rid of death and establishing the Golden Order.
I declare mine intent to search the depths of the Golden Order through understanding of the proper way. Our faith, our grace is increased. Those blissful early days of blind belief are long past. My comrades, why must ye falter?
It's uncertain whether Marika's words were delivered before Radagon went to Liurnia or after he returned from it, but they give us a great deal of insight into her motivations and the state of the world both before and after the emergence of the Golden Order. Marika wanted to increase the bounty of the Erdtrees' grace because it was insufficient for her needs, and she turned to the scholarship and understanding of the Golden Order because blind faith alone wasn't enough. This is reflected in the way the Golden Order seal and its fundamentalist incantations scale with intelligence, whereas the Erdtree seal and its incantations scale purely on faith. This suggests to me that the Erdtree already existed well before the advent of the Golden Order. Additionally, unless they were really bad at math or something, it doesn't make much sense for Marika's comrades to falter at a proclamation to study the Golden Order if it already existed. Maybe they just couldn't handle summer school.
Can't handle summer school.
Anyway, we're also told by Ania in the Mending Rune of the Death Prince that the Golden Order began by removing the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring. Thus, Marika turning away from blind faith in the Erdtree to becoming a scholar of the Golden Order would align with the Erdtree being fleeting during the Age of Abundance, yet made perfect and eternal later on. But this leaves us with a few questions. How and when was the Golden Order able to remove Destined Death from the Elden Ring? As usual, we're not given a direct answer, but it seems Marika needed Radagon to study Raya Lucarian sorcery to understand order. From items like Celestial Dew, the blue-white wooden shield, and the Astrologer set, we're told that fate is cradled within the stars of the night sky, and we can extrapolate from the Black Moon of Noxtella being the guide of countless stars that Renala may have used her full moon that bewitched the Academy to guide the stars as well. If Radagon gained the power to control the moon, then perhaps he could control the fate of Destined Death as well.
I would like to share my knowledge with you concerning the miracle of this Church of Vows. Radagon once cleansed himself with celestial dew, repented his territorial aggressions, and swore his love to Renala. The order of the Erdtree and the fate of the moon were conjoined, and all the wounds of war forgiven.
But the moon may not be the only force which holds sway over fate and Destined Death. The fundamental tenets of the Golden Order are the laws of causality and regression. Causality is the pull between meanings, that which links all things in a chain of relation, and regression is the pull of meaning, that all things yearn eternally to converge. These descriptions are pretty abstract though, and can be difficult to understand. For what it's worth, causality comes from Inga in Japanese, which is the Buddhist term for karma. While karma is typically thought of as a kind of cosmic debt and is associated with reincarnation, this doesn't quite cover the full meaning. There are disagreements based on differing schools of thought, but generally speaking, karma is the result of cause and effect. In some ways, it can be likened to the butterfly effect, where the current state of the world is influenced by past events, and the state of the world in the future will be influenced by actions taken in the present. All actions have consequences, thus it's pertinent to perform actions which will result in good karma or positive influences in the future, and it's also why someone can be told they need to deal with their karma or the events from the past which continue to have influence over them in the present. Because the chains of causality extend into the future, karma is often associated with fate, but it lacks the connotations of predestination affiliated with the idea of fate in the West, meaning one's karma or fate isn't set in stone. So while I think the localizers did a good job calling it the law of causality, it's unfortunate it doesn't convey causality's connections to fate quite the same way it does in Japanese. So what about the law of regression? Unfortunately, while we're able to get extra insight about the nature of causality through some missing cultural context, the same can't be said about regression. Instead, we may be able to learn more about it from looking at a spell directly related to it. Immutable Shield. The effects of Immutable Shield aren't particularly remarkable. They just increase all forms of non-physical damage negation and ailment resistance, but the name itself might give us a hint into how the law of regression is supposed to work. To be immutable is to be constant and unchanging, or said another way, eternal. If Radagon took the powers of causality and regression and made them fundamental parts of the Elden Ring, then it could potentially account for the way the Golden Order fettered the fate of the night sky, as well as the immutable nature of the Erdtree. To give a more practical explanation for the laws of causality and regression, the way I envision them working together would kind of be like what happens in the movie Groundhog Day.
That's right, woodchuck chuckers, it's Groundhog Day!
For those who may be unfamiliar, Groundhog Day is a 1993 movie where Bill Murray's character gets stuck in a kind of time loop and is forced to live the same day over and over. If we imagine waking up at the same time every day as the law of regression causing everything to converge back to the same point, then Bill's ability to live through the same day, yet slightly alter its flow of events through his actions, would be due to the law of causality. His fate isn't set in stone, but his karma is inescapable nonetheless. And that may be kind of like the current state of the Golden Order in the Lands Between as told to us by Golden Poop. For better or worse, it remains as it is. Let's return now to Marika's initial goal in declaring her support for the Golden Order: to increase the bounty of the Erdtree's grace. If Marika wanted to increase the bounty of her grace, then honestly, divesting the Tarnished of their grace doesn't make it sound like it would increase the bounty it would provide, so this could be grounds to argue divesting them of grace is unrelated to the Golden Order, and that it's more likely to have been altered when Radagon became Elden Lord. However, it's also possible to argue Marika divesting the Tarnished of their grace was done to remove Destined Death from it. There's a weird line of dialogue from the Lift of Rolled Finger Reader where she says, "The burning of the Erdtree is the first cardinal sin. Doing so will unbind Destined Death and slay the world itself." For a long time, I just took this as propaganda biased on behalf of the Two Fingers, since burning the Erdtree doesn't exactly slay the world itself, but ever since I read the Japanese description for the Dung-Eater's Seedbed Curse, I've had some lingering doubts. In English, it says cultivating the Seedbed Curse on corpses prevents dead souls from returning to the Erdtree, but in Japanese it says it prevents death from returning to the Erdtree. Now, this is the kind of thing where 9 out of 10 times it'd be fairly safe to equate the two, but with death being a metaphysical force in the universe of Elden Ring, and souls being divorced from it in other contexts, it makes me wonder whether the rolled finger reader crone is correct, and death is literally being sealed within the Erdtree to some degree. This would seemingly be at odds with how the Rune of Death was sealed into Maliketh's blade, but with Destined Death being the Forbidden Shadow, and Maliketh being Marika's shadowbound beast, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a metaphysical connection between Maliketh and the Erdtree if Maliketh is supposed to be part of Marika's very being, and the Erdtree is connected to her as well. Perhaps it's all meant to tie into the shadow of the Erdtree, but we'll have to wait and see. So now we're back at the impasse of trying to determine when exactly Destined Death was removed from the Elden Ring. As is tradition in a FromSoft game, it seems to come down to individual interpretation. I tend to think the events between Godfrey being tarnished of his grace, Destined Death being removed from the ring, and Radagon becoming Elden Lord are interlinked, especially since the Golden Order was supposed to increase the bounty of the Erdtree's grace, but I also recognize Destined Death could have been removed from the ring for a time before the laws of causality and regression were added with Radagon's Elden Rune. I know these beliefs really challenge the status quo, and while I couldn't touch on everything I wanted to without being more redundant than I already have, I hope what I've offered for now that ties duty, fate, grace, destiny, and death together is coherent enough to stand on its own and can enrich and broaden the discourse surrounding the game. So, do you think the grace of old was a real thing? Do you think it could have been a reddish hue? If it did exist, when do you think it was changed? I'm curious to hear your thoughts in the comment section, and if you want to discuss more lore, feel free to join my Discord server linked in the video description. Thanks for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed it. And special thanks to all my patrons and channel members for your continued support in helping keep this channel alive. Fear the old lore.